Hello, story seekers. I'm Nico.
I'm Ben, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Our guest for this episode is a writer who hails from Somerset in England. They have many strings to their bow, including teaching, acting, and singing.
Their high fantasy novel, The Wild God's Gambit, is out on submission right now, and we would like to warmly welcome Halla Williams.
Hello, Halla.
Thank you very much. Hello.
Lovely.
Very good to be
meet you.
here.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on. We're really looking forward to this.
I'm
Me
a
too.
big fan of this variation on the triple threat. The replacing the dancing with the writing. That's a strong play.
Oh, yes. Got to have lots of strings, don't you, nowadays?
Are you a quintuple or quadruple, I suppose? Threat. Can you dance? Can you dance, Halla?
Not professionally, but I can dance. I'm a mover.
All of you out there, you can dance, even if you have no rhythm. I believe in you.
That's right. It's the same with singing. Harmony is any note the person next to you is not making.
Oh, I love that.
You just got schooled on singing, Nico. That's
Did this is a good day to be me.
So from your bio and stuff that you like going and singing at open mics. What's your favourite thing about open mics?
I really enjoy the small audience dynamic and performing to a mixture of people you know and love and people who've never heard of you before, and really just communicating something to them.
Yeah,
I love that. That's my favourite thing.
Noble.
Do you go to a? Is it like a jam, or is it more of a? I've got a thing. I'll jump up and do it. That you go to.
I always go to the famous open mic at the Oxford and Totterdown in Bristol, because the host there books you in with the slot, but lots of people always want backing vocals or a bit of tambo, and so you can get up and do things with other people as well. So it makes for a lively evening.
Oh, that sounds really convivial. Like so somebody could just be like, "Oh, this song would be better with a tambourine. Has anyone got a tambourine?"
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
and people do often bring percussion, as well as their own instruments for their own set. So it's lovely. It's super lovely, and it's a really nice pub, so highly recommended.
Have you ever had to ask someone to stop joining in? Like, if they're like out of time or something?
There are one or two people who don't like you joining in. So poor Graham Moncrief, who is the most wonderful host, has to sometimes say, could you just hold it back, because this person doesn't like that. But on the whole, people are very welcoming for you to kind of sing along in the audience and bang the table and do all of that, because it makes for a nice atmosphere.
People singing along in the audience is literally the best feeling in the world.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want it?
No, I suppose if you're nervous and you're trying to concentrate.
It's an interesting one because the idea of playing to a small room, a lot of people would think, oh, well, you don't want to do that if there's only a few people or whatever. But 5 really energetic people who love what you're doing is better than 100 who aren't really bothered. It really is.
So much in agreement.
It's nice to have someone I can talk to about this actually on mic, because we've not really had any other singers on. But you get to feed back off people's energy, and it's a really strange thing, isn't it? Because you can be playing to a room, and even if one person's really into it, it just makes you do it better.
Oh, I'm so with you on that. I'm a real big supporter of good audienting. I think you get the performance you deserve in a small audience context. But if you're there and you're cheering along and you're bopping and you're really focusing on the stage, you will get a better performance. Guaranteed.
We get quite a lot of, especially sort of older blokes, a lot of older blokes in leather jackets who stand with their arms crossed, and they might nod a bit, but they're completely still and completely silent for the entire show.
Not a bit's high praise, though.
You feel like you're dying a death, and then they come to you at the merch afterwards and they're like, absolutely brilliant, best gig I've been to this year. I would have really liked to know that about 40 minutes ago, because then I wouldn't have been having a mental breakdown.
Yeah, you have to have faith that it is coming across somehow, even if you can't see the response. But I do like to see the response if you can. So yeah, good audienting is a skill.
Not to absolutely strike you in the heart, Nico, but you can't earn your father's approval by getting those old men's approval, right? That's not something that you can get.
That's unbelievably savage. Right, I'm moving us off of this before Ben absolutely destroys me. So I think we should have some stories.
I think we should too.
Our regular listeners know how it goes, but for those of you joining us for the first time, there will be 3 stories told in this episode. All of them have been written to the same shared prompt, and this week the prompt is tongues. Ben, you're up first.
Tongues. England, 1337. I could not breathe when I was born, and the midwife cut the tongue from my skull to remedy that. She told me later in life that a pestilent carbuncle lay at the heart of the meat, and such a tumour would have grown to spread through me. Without my tongue, I should have been able to keep my secrets past my moment of death and burial. But alas, I have been taught my letters, and as such cannot keep my peace. It was that same midwife who maimed me that raised me, and it was she who taught me to write. Marjorie, having fled her mother's hovel, had been a labourer in the great fields which surrounded our market town from when she was a small girl. Her life had changed when she had taken a job as a washerwoman for the hospice. That hospice was run by monks who cared for the lame and sick, passing their final years in that place. There she had discovered a talent for easing their passing, which had elevated her reputation in the town and surrounding villages. Encouraged by this, she had gone on to learn all she could from the monks. Do not think me boastful when I write that healing was not her only gift. There is often much left unsaid in a life, and Marjorie knew how to wring the last words from the dead after their deaths. That practice had perhaps started when she cut my tongue from me, but I think it was more likely knowledge given by her mother. That mater had been a hermit within the forest by the fens. In that place where no priests ever trod, she had fashioned medicines for the bodies and minds of the simple fen folk, from herbs, saps, and mushrooms. Marjorie spoke of her infrequently. The reason for my written words, however, is not Marjorie, nor her mother. It is a man named Henry. Henry, though an Englishman, had spent much of his life as a bishop in Philip of Valois' court. There he had plotted the recapture of Acre in the Holy Land, with the French nobles at the behest of Pope John XII. Their religious war never started, for the Pope died and Philip's mind turned to rising tensions with Edward III of England. As such, Henry was dismissed and found himself the humble master of our hospice in his native country. The new Pope Benedict is thought to be a cautious man, yet he has not rescinded the papal bull on witchcraft his predecessor issued. For most of the first 20 years of my life, the term witch has been one that I have avoided. Ever have I been Marjorie's helper, though it was often against my will, for the deed is unpleasant. Who else, she would ask, who else could do what I can? She showed me what was possible for the first time when I was 8. A rich blacksmith had died without a will, and the bloody arguments of his sons threatened to engulf the town. I was brought to the dead man's coffin, and there Marjorie cut out his tongue as she had once cut mine, before slathering it in mushroom paste and forcing it between my pursed lips. I spoke to his sons with the dead man's voice, settling the issue. It was by no means the last time. Closure, justice, love, all were reasons to seek Marjorie and her girl who spoke for the dead. It was done in secret, however, for all feared Henry, the master of the hospice. Though he was no bishop, he walked to the church on holy days with his crozier, which was fashioned from gilded French metal. He was known to be liberal with it as a rod of punishment, often going so far as to put women and men in the care of his monks at the hospice. 5 days ago, the father of a girl taken into that hospice on Master Henry's orders came to us to beg our help. The girl had been hale, he claimed. The injury which warranted her committal to the hospice had been sustained in the field when a plough horse kicked her. By her father's reckoning, it had been no more than a broken rib or two. The girl had died that morning. Her body had been buried quickly in the hospice graveyard, and the coffin ordered to remain sealed by Henry. Marjorie's reaction was instant. She insisted that we take some of the father's friends and, after dark, exhume the girl. The cold of night cast our breath in visible clouds as we watched the men bring her up. I saw that her flesh bore marks no horse had made. Marjorie took out her tongue shears and set to work. Before the morning light could climb the horizon, we had heard the girl's terrified wails coming from my mouth. Her father paled at the noise, and he and his fellows angrily charged off upon hearing her words from the afterlife. The next day, Marjorie was arrested by the master's men and tried for witchcraft. I saw the bodies of the men I had spent the night in the cold with, dangling from nooses in the market square. Their crimes were proclaimed by the crier as attempted theft and assault on a clergyman. Their tongues had been cut out and fed to the master's hounds. Marjorie smiled when she arrived at the platform of her pyre. From there she could see the purple stain of a bruise around Henry's eye. They burned her, and I saw the smoke took too long to choke her. From her screams, I knew she must have felt her skin crackle and split to allow the fat underneath it to run out in hot gushes. I inspected the ashes afterwards, but her tongue had burned up with the rest of her. Her truth would die with her. The master's men had ignored me when they came for her, revealing their ignorance of the fact I know my letters. I write this, not knowing who will read it, but with certainty that it must be recorded somewhere. England, 1347. Henry died yesterday. The other priest said his heart gave out whilst at dinner. It was 10 years to the day since Marjorie smirked at him from her pyre. I snuck from my bunk in the hospice and took the tongue from his corpse with Marjorie's shears. I carried it with me to his funeral. There I stuffed the grotesque muscle into my mushroom-pasted mouth and chewed it back to life. The entwining of our flesh inside my mouth made me gag. My wretched squawks became a scream of fear as his voice exploded from me. He spoke of hell and attempted to atone for the manipulations, thefts, and assaults he had perpetrated beneath God's gaze. I found myself led by the tongue to the graves of his victims, and panicked apologies fell from me like vomit. The townsfolk and the priest witnessed it all. When he was done, I, panting, wrenched his muscle from my mouth and tossed the meat away. It landed and slid along the lid of his coffin. "Dig it deeper," spoke the blacksmith's son. "I'll help." We dug until clay and water would permit no more depth. Only then did we toss Henry's corpse face down into that hole. Divested of his cross, crozier, and cassock, his was less than a pauper's burial. I have faith in my heart that with his passing many wrongs have been righted, and the future, by God's will, must hold peace and happiness for all.
Wow.
I tell you what, that Henry was a bastard.
Sure was.
When I tell you that when you first described a tongue being put in our main character's mouth, and then beginning to talk with a dead voice, I leant back, and then my eyes went really wide, and I leant forward again further than I had been originally, and I don't even know what to call that reaction.
Yeah.
Drawing back and drawing in, definitely.
Yeah.
I was quite excited by the way you said mushrooms, and I thought that was funny at first, and then I realised why mushrooms was such a sinister word, because of the mushroom paste. And that worked so well because you flagged it vocally, and
Yes.
then I was paying attention.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. It's an odd thing, isn't it? I don't know. This idea of curing things with magic mushrooms is quite an interesting one, I think. Like seems like a bit of a truism at the moment that that people sort of do know that, you know, little bits of like microdosing or whatever can help with things. Not everything, obviously, but some things.
There's a lot of discourse, isn't there, about the idea that it was eating some sort of experimental myconids, let's call them, in humanity's development was a big part of.
Oh, you're talking about the stoned ape theory? Yeah. I think that is just a theory. Yeah, it like a sort of very early man, flipping over herbivore cowpats in fields and finding mushrooms and eating them. It's this idea that sort of expanded consciousness that psychedelics give you is why we have the level of sentience and intelligence we have. We sort of evolved with mushrooms and stuff like that.
It's a great theory.
I don't think it's been proved. I like it. I like it a lot. I think it makes a lot of sense, but I don't know whether it's been.
How do you? You got to find cave paintings of someone's bong or something. Is that how
Well,
we?
it's really interesting that you mentioned that actually, because the way that this story came about is that I live in Cambridge in England, and there is currently a really interesting study happening because in they have the colleges of the university. There's one called
Yeah.
St John's, and St John's used to be a hospital, as in a hospice, in the 11th, 12th, and 13th century, and 14th century, I think, as well. Before it became a college with Henry Tudor's mother donating the money to make it so. But at the moment, they're in for a while they've been in the process of exhuming the cemetery that was by that hospice.
Oh wow!
And what they've done is they've created a project called After the Plague, which, as they put it, takes a multidisciplinary bioarchaeological approach with sub-projects in skeletal studies, paleopathology, geometric morphometrics, genetics, and isotopic analyses to basically construct theories about the lives of the people buried in that cemetery. Because
damn,
it's really cool because there's lots of work done on rich people's graves, and very little done on the sort of the common folk and the poor of the era. Yeah.
I know. It's look. I'm not saying I'm the thick one, but when when you started telling this very interesting anecdote, I thought you were going to say something like, "No, they found a deeply frozen caveman actually in Cambridge. So they're going to look at his urine like an Encino man."
I think I jumped there because you were talking about like how would you know, and I think even from where, because what they've really done is they've constructed these biographies of these people from these corpses that they have, and it's very difficult because all you've got is like muscle imprint on bone and the way that like cartilage is twisted, or you can tell that they broke a rib, or they had like some sort of infection in their knee at some point. So they're trying to extrapolate stories of people's lives from just bone. And obviously you can't really get stuff like, you were talking about the stoned ape thing. You can't, we have bones of early humans, and you can't tell from just the bones. Yeah. But some of the characters in the story are bodies from that.
Oh, cool.
I was going to ask, because obviously you grounded it quite a lot in some historical detail. You gave specific years. Why the gap of 10 years between Marjorie's look at Henry and the comeuppance?
So, I think for me, I sort of wanted to sort of have the character live with it for a while. That, from like a storytelling perspective, that was why I did that. I liked this idea of her living a bit more of a life, but it sort of hinted at that she's in the hospice after that. So I think she's sort of very much controlled, and she doesn't really come back to life until Henry dies, because Henry sort of gets control of the situation. But the actual time, the date that I give, that 1347, and the ending of the future by God's will must hold peace and happiness for all. 1347. That's about 6 months before the Black Death arrives in England.
Yes, it's not a very hopeful ending, because obviously
it's not
very demonstrably witchcraft in the eyes of the public that she performs. So I don't have a lot of hope for her.
No, well, about 50% of Cambridge's population died during the Black Death. However, most of the priests died. Most of the priests died during the Black Death. It's something like 50% of the people died, but 90% of the priests died, because obviously they go and give people their last rites and stuff, don't they? So they catch it. So yeah, no, it's not a particularly hopeful ending. I think that maybe that's tied up in a bit of post-pandemic malaise for me. Yeah, it's sort of, I love being like finding something and then just being like, this is fuel for the story. Fire this. Yeah. I'm putting it in.
So there's one element in there that I really like, actually. That I don't want to not say it before we inevitably move on. I really like the emphasis on the power of the written word, because obviously it's not a widely available skill in the time that it's set, and the our lead character sort of at first ruining it because it's kind of been foisted upon them in place of a tongue, and then later knowing that because they have it, there is a record can be kept of this thing that's happened, and now thankfully they have a power to keep that record longer than they'll be alive. I just thought it was a really cool through line in the piece.
It's definitely not a voice that you typically hear from that period of history. It's all like the idea that this character would be able to, well, for a start, exist because obviously the witchcraft stuff is all made up, but like also that this poor common woman, girl who becomes a woman later on in the story, would be able to read and write is just nonsense. Like that, just I don't think my understanding is that in no way was that possible at that point.
Yeah,
I think that people had more letters than we thought from my
really?
teaching of English language A level.
Go on.
That actually there was more. My impression from the research that I kind of come across as I was teaching was that there was far more literacy among peasant class than we thought.
And is that?
But I don't have any sources to substantiate that, so you can.
Well, that's okay.
Take it or leave it.
We can knock it about. And would that have been Latin, or would that have been sort of Middle English, or whatever it was at that point?
Do you know? I don't know. I haven't dug enough into it.
Interesting, because
Make a note to self research this.
I do know that you had stuff like this is from my sort of history. I think this may have even been history GCSE at this point. But, you would have something like a weregild in sort of old England, and if you killed someone or whatever, you would have to pay a blood price if to their family or be executed yourself or whatever.
Yeah.
But one of the ways that you could get out of it was by pleading the cloth or something, with pleading the clergy or something. And if you could prove that you could read the Bible, you were tried in a court of priests, not by like a secular court, and priests can't execute you. So if you were clever enough to either memorize or learn to read a bit, you could really get away with murder.
Oh, you've learned this, like Corinthians 2 or whatever. They're like, read this. I'd prefer to read Corinthians 2, actually.
Yeah, I don't think they allowed you to pick the passage. I think you had to. You probably have to memorize the whole bloody thing or learn to read. Probably quicker to learn to read, really.
It's actually so much faster to learn a few phonics.
Some people learn orally and some people learn visually, and it's a different skill entirely, isn't it?
Yeah, that's very true.
This guy really paid attention when he was in church. I'm gonna need this is gonna be on the test, so I'll really focus in.
I will just shout out that anyone can go and read these biographies and the methods and the results and the stuff on this After the Plague project. And it's just aftertheplague.org. I'm finding it fascinating. It's in no way affiliated with the podcast, but I think it's really cool. So there you go.
To confirm, no recently woken up caveman who was in the deep freeze.
I didn't, not from the biographies I read, no.
Shit.
Yeah.
Well, seeing as a kind of a caveman to tide me over, do you reckon you could tell me a story, huh?
I think I could. I think I could do that.
Excellent.
I've actually given this one a title. This one's called Silver Tongue. You heard that I had a silver tongue, that I will tell you a beautiful story about yourself. You're wealthy and privileged enough that, of course, you see me as beneath you. But my voice, my clothes, the way I hold your gaze, will never give away that I have mud and blood on my hands. Your giddy expectation of quick fruition for your hopes and dreams jostles aside your reservations. You place your coin in my hands. The gold glitters with sweaty desires, but I am not the object of them. You are. Orichallo, teller of potent tales, was coming back to the city. It was news of the very best kind for Tisande, whose hopes for a good love match had been dashed so many times. Orichallo would help her. The storyteller always chose someone worthy to help. No doubt many among the city's elite would petition Orichala to choose them, to make a story about their future that would give them their heart's desire. But Orichala would choose Tissande, because Tissande would tell her a story. And in return, Orichala would tell her a better one where she was admired and loved. Tissande would ensure it. Orichala would change everything for her. First, she hired the very best portrait artists the capital had to offer. 100 gold matryoshnia to draw me exactly as I am, no minimizing my nose or lengthening my eyelashes. Draw me broken-hearted and bitter, the ugly mule they all see when I remove my makeup. Tissande wept as she wiped away the fine concoctions to show the artist the blotchy, ravaged, unlovable face beneath. She raised her chin, turning in the grey light to give Shonia the full picture. My gift is to find beauty. I cannot draw what you want. Your duty is to capture what your clients wish. Draw me like this. I cannot have such a work seen, Dimitar Tissande. It would ruin my reputation. This picture is for a very specific audience, Matryoshnia, and it is urgent. I promise it is between the three of us. You, me, and Matra Orichala. Orichala! I would not have her see you so. Why would you? That is none of your business. 1,000 gold, my promise to keep the work private, and you will begin now. The second part of the petition would be the letter that accompanied the portrait. Orichala might be well read, so Tissande could not crib from the greats for her impassioned plea. But she had another idea. Her maids had talked of a notorious bard in the north of the city. He would help her craft her letter. Her mother's burly doorman, laden with enough silver to trouble him, found the man. He brought the nervy, tastelessly dressed bard to the courtyard garden where she conducted her private meetings. The bard would be intimidated to compose something for Orichala, and she didn't want everyone knowing she'd applied, in the unlikely case she was unsuccessful, so she asked for something she could transform. Write me a love letter, bare my soul, make my lover pity me, and break their heart that I could be so tortured and still survive. If I describe you so, will it not drive your lover away? I could seduce them with your unquenchable passion. I've had many a success in that regard. Her look quelled his budding flirtation. You will write what I wish you to write, and tell no one. I will pay you 15 gold for your discretion. Tissande didn't stop the tears that dampened the page as she copied the bard's brutal rendition of her woes onto the petition letter. It added to the effect. Lastly, she added the expected sweetener, a personal item of worth. Tissande wouldn't give the storyteller anything truly valuable. Orichala would know how much money her family had, and that would seem too easy. It had to be something thoughtful. Tissande braided her hair. Holding her breath, she severed it with a knife at the base of her neck. The wiry greys threaded through the brown-black plait looked suitably pitiful. The regret, and then the bitter satisfaction, made it all the more worthy. This would work. It would be worth it. Waiting was almost intolerable. When a letter came back, it was light, insubstantial. It was a refusal. No, no, no. Tissande's fingers were clumsy, trembling as she broke the seal and unfolded the missive. Come alone, bring my fee and your wish. Tissande's heart surged with triumph. Chosen! For this, if nothing else. It would change everything. But she had heard of others being refused at the last. She must stay sorrowful, authentic. Tisson bowed her head to hide a smile only the gods could see. The details of the fee, the address, and the terms were brief. The time was that night. Tisson summoned the doorman. He could guide her, protect her, and wait outside. Her story was not for his ears. The small room was walled with silk, transforming it into the likeness of a tent. Orichala was a shadow behind a partition. Zit! Orichal's voice filled the whole space, shuddering the air. Tisson found her legs giving way and sat, quickly, gracelessly, on a cushion clearly placed there for the purpose. She wasn't embarrassed. She wanted to look piteous. Tisson widened her eyes and tilted her head forward to show a respect she didn't feel. Maitre Orical, I'm so grateful for your invitation. The woman who came around the divide was slight and pale, wearing fine, mystical-looking robes, but no jewellery. Her eyes flickered in the candlelight. The fee, child. Tisson offered out the banker's draft. The paper trembled in her grip most satisfactorily. Her mother had not objected to the expense. Perhaps she hoped Tisson would not continue to disappoint her. But to be called a child by a woman perhaps younger than her? Orichala took the paper, examined it, and tucked it away in her robe. She sat before Tisson and held out her hands. Tisson didn't want to touch her, but the imperative was clear, and she placed her fingers in the woman's smaller ones. Orichala drew her closer, and Tisson leaned forward. The woman tilted her head to examine Tisson's palms, and Tisson took the chance to examine her. Seeing the storyteller's pale brown hair and thin lips, she imagined her doffing the costume and going back to scrubbing pots after her telling, despite her steep fees. But when Orichala gripped Tisson's thumbs and she returned the pressure, it was clear the woman's hands were as smooth as her own. How absurd that was. Then Orichala looked up, and Tisson wondered how she could ever have mistaken her for a kitchen hand. Eyes like the sky above a sunset held her tighter than the small fingers that pressed her flesh. Your letter said you lacked beauty, were never enough to hold a lover's attention, that you could not make a good match. In your new story, this is not so. In your new story, you are a goddess to all who gaze on you. Tisson gasped at the blasphemy but wouldn't look away. She felt the power building between them, heating their clasped hands and starting to travel up her arms. You will leave here feeling your own power. Tisson could feel the storyteller's power. It reached her shoulders, then her throat, and Tisson was finding it hard to breathe. When you walk into the wintering ball, no one will see your impeccable dress, the lavish jewels, the phoenix mask you will wear. Tisson couldn't breathe at all. The strange feeling, wondrous and warm, but implacable and terrifying, had reached her head and stomach. She stared into the storyteller's eyes helplessly. They will see you in all your glory, behind the mask, behind the jewels, behind the dress, and want to be in your presence. They will yearn for you, Tisson. The feeling blazed behind Tisson's eyes, and she wept. Tears of delight, not self-pity. She felt powerful, beautiful, desirable. The suitor you invite to dance will feel privileged, will seek to charm you. The power had reached Tisson's loins and pulsed there as she imagined the thrill. But you must never fall in love with anyone, Tisson, or your power over them will leave you. If you fall for their charms, you will wither in their sight. Tisson shifted uneasily. The power hadn't reached her lower legs. She could still pull away. But what was such a cost to her, really? She wanted to be loved, but what good was loving? It had only ever hurt her. It might be a challenge, but with so much at stake, was there anything she wouldn't do? A fierce grin twisted Toussaint's face. It was all worth it. She let the warmth fill her completely. It was done. You got what you wanted. Your heart's desire is coming. Your limbs swell with the power of fulfillment. Don't forget, it was my story that changed you. Tell others. Tell your rich friends. My tongue isn't silver. It's gold.
Thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you.
It was so cool.
Very cool. I really enjoyed this like wonderful web of patronage that this wealthy woman uses to achieve her goals. Yeah, I've read quite a lot of fantasy literature. And I haven't really encountered that, like going to the different artists and performers and stuff, and getting what you need from each of them. It's such a cool concept, especially for a short story. It's a really good structure, and then this wonderfully powerful moment of the power of the story at the end. That was right up my alley. That was really good.
It's really nice. The characters that we got to see very briefly, the bard and the artist, and they were. I think a big part of it was your delivery, because you voiced them really well, but it was the kind of like their resistance to, because she didn't want beauty from them, and paying these artists to work against type, all for her benefit. It made this really kind of nice, like, power imbalance tug of war thing, because I don't know, there's just something about how that character was set up, to have access to everything, and be kind of blind to how much she was pouring on getting just the one thing she didn't have, only to then decide she didn't even need it at the end. Like, what a great character journey.
The artist who says, I can't do that. My gift is to find beauty.
Yeah.
I did like that as well. There was just something to it that you really did bring them to life. The sort of limitations of their art and their outlook. Yeah. Is this from a world that you have constructed before?
Yes. So I took out all the references to places and things that were specific to my book, because I felt it was quite a heavy load for an audience who wouldn't be familiar with that.
Sure.
The book's not been sold yet. So I simplified it down. But yes, this is set on
I think you can
Ikla,
feel
the main city of Fadej.
Right. Yeah, you can totally feel the depth of your world building in it. So I think that's pretty clear that whoever's currently reading that on sub should definitely be accepting it.
It would be weird not to.
Also, I will say your performance was great as well. The voices that draw me exactly as I am. It had almost like a Russian tang to it. It was It was really interesting and good. I liked it a lot.
There is, I think, because we haven't seen that much of it in kind of popular media here, say save from The Witcher, but that kind of Slavic mythos stuff, there is a lot of really cool kind of like the ideas of this like Romany oracle, and that accent does set it up for a kind of fantasy that I think I'm very ready for. Might be why it hit me the way it did. I don't know. It's just, I really enjoy. I'm struggling to put into words what it was, but just something about it I vibed with super hard.
Good. If you like Slavic mythology, I would recommend you check out Gabriella Houston. She writes with all rooted in that, and she's very good indeed.
Very good. Any particular stories, or just generally?
Her first one, The Second Bell, is wonderful, and it's based on this idea of the Striga and being outcast from your village. And it's a mother-daughter story where the mother goes with her. to protect her to the village of the outcast Striga. And this resistance to your own power and coming to terms with it, it's really well done, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, that area of the world appears to just produce stories that stick with you in the way that horror and love stick with you in the same way. The right at the start, one thing that I wrote down was that this gold that was glittering with sweaty desires, but that the other person isn't the object of the desires, yourself is.
Yeah.
That concept of paying for patronage to glorify yourself is one that I find quite interesting. It wasn't actually relevant to your story, but it reminded me very strongly of the Saxon stories for Bernard Cornwell, where people just pay bards to go and sing about them.
Oh yeah.
And there's something sort of vaguely masturbatory about it, but at the same time, it's very important because if you can end a fight before it's even begun because of your reputation, then you may as well. Like that's the best way to do that. So obviously that's not what's happening inside this story, but it was that same sort of I'm going to use all the tools at my disposal. I liked it a lot. Ruthless.
You mentioned The Witcher earlier, one of you. It's like toss a coin to your Witcher. You've got to have the song that sells the idea rather than the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you heard Nico's version of Toss a Coin to Your Witcher?
No, but I'm going to do that next.
It's on YouTube, and it is excellent. Yes, no, that was a great tale. Thank you so much for telling it.
Oh, you're very welcome. I really enjoyed writing to a prompt.
Hurry up and get your book published so that we can read the rest of it. Thank you. Come on, stop slacking.
Speaking of slacking, it's your turn, Nico.
Nope, incorrect. Okay, a tale. Tongues. Did you really kiss her? The question came fast. The follow-up, faster. Properly, with tongues. It was nearly an accusation. It had been widely agreed by everyone now that a kiss wasn't a kiss unless there was tongue involved. Anyone could press lips against someone's face. You'd kiss your mum like that, but not with tongue. Tongue made it a proper kiss. A snog, according to James Loseby. He heard his sister call it a snog, but the rest of the boys remained unconvinced. Alfie wondered if now was the time to deploy that word, maybe as a smokescreen around the question. Maybe the other boys would get into it about the etymological potential of snog, and then the supposed kiss would be forgotten. He had not, in fact, kissed Jessica, with or without tongues. He traded her a pair of Snickers bars and the last scraps of his birthday money to say that she had been kissed by him, though. Alfie wasn't sure if Jessica was being interrogated like he was, but he had to say something. The gaggle of lads around him seemed to be closing in entirely, and he found he was cocooned. Somewhere around the start of year 9, everyone else had started getting tall, and the sensation of being loomed over was unpleasant. Yeah, obviously I did. A real kiss with tongues. The collective leaned back, their young brains spinning on the idea of getting a kiss for themselves. Did you get to touch her? You know. One of the boys made a suggestive hand motion. A few others joined in the honking of imagined bosoms. Alfie blurted a panicked response. A gentleman never tells. The lads around him split into a mixture of laughter and disappointment. He felt himself going beet red. Where had he even heard that phrase before? It must have been in a film or something, but saying it out loud to an entire group of lads, he had tanked all credibility. That might work in his favour, though. This could be the day where he'd said something weird instead of Kissgate. Jacob separated himself from the pack and moved in close to Alfie, then bowed low. Gentlemen, he said, in a voice aimed somewhere between Dickensian and Etonian. The other boys would have described it as posh, or a bit poncy. Alfie snorted and bowed back instinctively. Ah, gentlemen, he offered in response. As with most of Jacob's jokes, it caught like wildfire, and the group of boys started to bow to each other. Cries of gentlemen went up. Someone screamed, "The Duke is on the telephone, Your Grace!" and in the ensuing strangeness, Jacob nodded over his shoulder, and he and Alfie bolted. They'd been friends forever, in that way that 6 years feels like all of time to a teenage boy. Jacob was funny, in a surprising and immediate kind of way. He was tall and handsome. He was muscular, especially since the occasional football games had become proper training. He was confident. He was definitely snogging girls, probably girls from other schools. He was everything Alfie wasn't, and yet somehow it made them work together all the better. Alfie knew where they were going. There was a place under the bushes at the back of school where people used to go and smoke. Now they'd moved on, which was always the case once the 14-year-olds found out where the cool kids were hanging out. The two of them had taken to hanging out there themselves, when Jacob knew Alfie was overwhelmed. He was sweet like that. As they squeezed their way into the dog-end-littered micro-clearing, Jacob dropped his bag and flopped down effortlessly. Alfie leaned against an exposed trunk and slid down a little slower, until the two of them were left with nothing but the sound of slightly heightened breathing and the muffled noise of everyone else's normal lunch break. "Did you get off with her then?" Jacob asked, splitting the silence like ripe fruit. "Get off?" Alfie asked. "You know, like..." Jacob began a strange, writhing mime, his hands entangled with an imagined lover, his tongue sloshed about in space. Alfie snorted. "Oh, kissing and that." Jacob had fixed his eyes on Alfie, an eyebrow raised. It was best friend language for, "Try and lie to me. I dare you." "No, I didn't." Jacob shrugged and closed his eyes, leaning back over his bag. "Yeah, I know. I just wanted to see if you'd lie to me." Alfie didn't know if he should be hurt or not. His best friend hadn't believed him. Or, to be honest with himself, he hadn't constructed the most compelling narrative. We had a kiss. He hadn't even made up where. Oh God, he hadn't told Jess where to say either. This was a nightmare. It was all unravelling so fast. How did you know then?" Alfie asked, wondering if he could spend the rest of his life living in the hedge aperture, eating only old dog ends and fallen leaves. "Jess is gay. I asked her out last term and she told me. Still a secret, I think. Or everyone would have known that you're full of shit." He smiled wide and opened his eyes again. The hazel of them seemed impossibly dark in the shade of nature. "And you are, of course, which is definitely a secret, because you haven't even told me." "How do you know?" Alfie felt the words escape like a breaking dam. Even if he'd closed his teeth, they'd have squirted through. Jacob rolled over, so that Alfie was no longer looking up his nose. "Well, I didn't, for sure, till you just confirmed it. But I thought you probably were." Alfie felt the icy water of that knowledge being out there soak into him. It started at the feet and began drenching him in panic, bone by bone. "Are you going to tell everyone?" Alfie felt his strength disappear with the words. I'll do whatever you want if you promise not to. You can have my PS2. Just please don't. I'm not ready to be gay." The chill terror of being outed drowned him, ended his rambling. Jacob set his face into a stern mask. It was unusual to see him not smiling. "Alf, mate. No." He pushed himself up onto his forearms and shuffled awkwardly across the ground. He grunted as the bag rolled underneath him, and Alfie felt a laugh fight its way through tears he hadn't realised his cheeks were drenched in. Jacob stopped with his forehead touching Alfie's. "I'm not going to say I understand it all, mate, because I don't. But you're my best friend. So what if you're gay? That makes us like the perfect squad, doesn't it? Different perspectives and all that." Jacob pressed a little more firmly. "Mate, remember when we were in year 7 and my mum got ill? When she went, mate, I thought that was it. People took the piss out of me for that. Some people still call me dead mum." Jacob shook his head. "But I can't change that. Just like you can't change you. Do you remember what you did when you found out about my mum?" Alfie remembered. He'd been taping gladiators for weeks. He liked to rewatch them in a bunch on Sunday and practice the moves. Badly. His mum had made shortbread. He took both to Jacob's. Shortbread and gladiators. He said it aloud. His voice sounded wobbly and weird, bouncing straight off Jacob's face like it was. Yeah. Shortbread and gladiators. And I spat crumbs everywhere singing Wolf's theme song. I didn't think I was ever going to laugh again, and you sorted me out. Alfie felt Jacob's head move away, and a body slumped next to him, a long arm draped around his shoulders. Nothing's different, mate. You might be a dickhead, but you're my dickhead. When you're ready, you can say whatever you want. I'll even forget until you're ready to tell me officially. I did trick you after all. Alfie leant his head into Jacob's shoulder. I love you, mate. Jacob said it with so much warmth that the chill of fear began to thaw. And Alfie sniffed. That's pretty gay, mate. He let himself smile, and then giggle. Jacob's mouth had fallen open, and then suddenly his big laugh began. The pair fell about, safe in their butt-laden bubble. And to any teacher who might be walking the perimeter, the hedges seemed to be having the time of their life.
That was lovely.
Thank you.
An affirming story. It's very pleasant.
So sweet.
I needed some posies, some positive vibes.
Absolutely.
And I think they manifested in the story writing, which was very cathartic, actually.
You can have my PS2. That had strong energy to it.
Yeah.
I set it in time for me because it was taking me back to my childhood, which was a bit earlier than that, with all the like snog poncy you get off with, all the fake making love gestures.
Yeah.
And then that set me in a different time, but I liked it.
The honking imagined bosoms.
Yeah.
Is potentially
I laughed.
one of the funniest things you've written, and it's not like the most like laugh out loud. It's just it just captured these like young dumbasses so well.
Oh yeah.
That absolutely caught me. I chuckled.
Yeah, the whole bit where they're like saying gentlemen together and talking about the Duke on the phone. All the rest of it.
Yeah.
It just that's exactly what it was like. Yeah, 100%.
I think that was a big part of it. As I was writing it, I had that sensation of, God, I remember we're all so stupid at that age. Like, even the smart kids were so dumb. And we all thought we knew absolutely everything about what was going on. And it was quite nice to inhabit that space briefly, writing these characters.
Yeah. And it was so nice to hear kids like I was saying etymological potential of snog and hedge aperture, and then Ponzi, you know.
I also wrote down.
Contrast.
I also wrote down hedge aperture because I feel like that is actually probably something that everybody can relate to, because there is just always that gap in the hedge where people have forced their way through, potentially over generations of people at that school.
Yeah.
And it sort of gets forgotten for a time, fades in and out of how cool it is and stuff. But like, there's always like a weird little human-shaped gap in a hedge somewhere on school property, at least in the UK, anyway.
Yeah, one of those liminal spaces, isn't it, where you're moving between the reality of school and the forbidden beyond, or the mystical.
Anything's possible there. Anything's possible. You can find all sorts of things, mostly gross things, but you can find all sorts of things.
Those places where anything's possible but nothing's actually happening, you mean? That we all had at school.
It's never as interesting as you hoped, you mean?
No.
Yeah, that's the one.
Singing Hungry Like the Wolf as you practice gladiator moves.
Oh my God, I love gladiators.
What was that about? Just a bunch of like roided up, angry, aggressive people just playing games together. It was...
It's a cartoon strip. It was the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Of broadly drawn characters.
They'd get, members of the public in who thought they'd be alright at it, and obviously they would struggle because the people doing it were monsters. Genetically perfect powerhouses decide to not let you win.
They
That
were
was the
not
whole.
genetically perfect. They were clearly roided up to the gills. They're all
Listen,
tests to the back.
Jet was genetically
Oh,
perfect,
I
and I
love
stand
Jet.
by it. Who
But
doesn't?
I don't think you could do that show now because there are too many like CrossFit nuts and MMA freaks and stuff like that. They just, like Wolf would like take one step and then someone would sort of Brazilian jiu-jitsu him off the stage or something, and then that's the end of your format.
Yeah.
They do Ninja Warrior now, so they compete against each other. These
It's
people.
just time, isn't it? Yeah.
If we're getting onto
Although,
these kind of shows,
oh
I'm
yeah,
gonna shout out the Titan Games. If you've not seen it, Hella, we
I'm
only
writing
got
that down.
season 1 here briefly, but there are a few seasons. It is it was during lockdown, which may speak for itself partly. And
coloured it a
anyone
bit.
listening, go and find it. It's weirdly compelling when they'll pick two people. It'll be like, okay, this is one of them really is called Frank, and he's a firefighter from New York, and we don't remember the other guy because it was all about Frank. And
It sure was.
they just pit them in these absolutely ludicrous challenges. It's hosted by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and he weirdly dunks on Kevin Hart a lot while Kev isn't there to defend himself.
And constantly plugs his tequila brand as well. It's
Constantly.
insane.
But
He has a tequila brand. My respect has increased. I love tequila.
Terra Mana, if we're gonna be getting the Rock dollar here, because I'd take that. I'd take that.
I'm writing that down as well.
But yeah, get yourself a bottle of tequila and watch the Titan Games. Everyone.
That sounds like a very good plan.
I think we must have, because we actually obviously weren't in the same place because we were locked down, but we watched that together and we made so much noise laughing deep into the night that everybody on that call, there was a big Discord call with 7 of our closest friends or so, and all of us got disciplined by either our other halves, neighbours, whatever. Like we were just making way too much noise because
like 4 a.m.
it was completely antisocial, but not for us because it was our main. This is what makes me think it's coloured it somewhat because it was our first like real explosion of letting off steam. We watched The Rock for a bit. Very good. Well, thank you for that
try and
story.
recreate that. I'll have to try and get some people online to watch it with me.
I feel like tequila is going to be your friend. Yeah, the tequila's going to be your friend, I think. Well, thank you for that story. That was a really nice, pleasant one to end on, I think.
Makes a change.
But Halla, before we move on and ask you some questions, where can people find you? Where can they wait for news about the upcoming potential of the book and everything else?
The same place you found me, hallawilliams.net. HALLAWILLIAMS.net. That's where I've got information about the book that's on Serb, The Wild Gods Gambit, and I've got a pre-short story if you subscribe to my mailing list, which is also set in that world, which is a prequel story. And very, very occasional news. Just, I will not spam you by any means.
You cannot beat
Possibly
free
me.
game. Get over there. Get over there and get on that mailing list, you saucy monkeys.
I am still on X, but I'm not really checking it. I am on Blue Sky, so you can follow me at hallawilliams.bsky.social.
Wonderful.
I'm at Halla Williams 1 on X. I am Halla Williams Fantasy Writer on Facebook. So those are all places you can have a look.
Got all your bases covered then.
Kind of.
Fantastic. Well, join us next time for the questions, where we'll be diving in with Halla about storytelling and maybe an alien or two. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year.
Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?